away for 30 years. So when I got off the airplane yesterday in Grand Rapids, I thought to myself, it is so great to be back in America. I could just smell freedom when I landed in Michigan, and I knew I was no longer in Washington because between getting off the plane and meeting you, Steve, there were 3 people I had never met or seen who said hello. You know, like I thought, wow, this is not Washington, you know. What a beautiful part of America this is. I love Michigan. We have had a very temperate winter in Washington, so to see the snow and the beauty of this part of our country is great. And I must tell you all, as our sort of new friendship starts, I'm an Abraham Lincoln man. And today, we of course celebrate his birthday. In our home, it's a holiday. You know, no Abraham Lincoln, no United States. That's not an opinion, that is a fact. And anyone who doesn't have a basic understanding about the remarkable events that were happening in America between 1860 and 1865 robs himself or herself of one of the greatest chapters of American history. I know most of us are sitting down today. In honor of Lincoln, I just make these comments, and this is something we all, I think, need to internalize as Americans, that in the Great Civil War, 750,000 Americans lost their lives. You know, you go to Gettysburg Battlefield or to Arlington, which is just a few miles from our home. I drive past Arlington every day, and you look up into those serene hills and across the sweep of this remarkable place, and you realize that the soldiers who gave their lives at Gettysburg were buried in Robert E. Lee's peach orchard. You know, Robert E. Lee never went back to Arlington House after 5 generations of that home in his family. He saw it from the window leaving Union Station one day. And I hope all of you, and if you haven't been, please come to Washington. You stand at the Lincoln Memorial and you look at the Memorial Bridge, which connects the great Lincoln Memorial to Arlington, this sign of national unity, uniting the North and the South. It's a remarkable story. You know, we wake up every day and we're in peace and security and freedom. I say this with great humility. It's easy to take that for granted. Most of the world does not enjoy what Grace University enjoys. Here we are in a beautiful, warm place. God has given us this beautiful sunshine and snow. We all come here to celebrate, in one sense, religious liberty, higher education. This combination of Lincoln's intelligence and courage is the ultimate statement of statesmanship, and we are his great beneficiaries. You know, in real America, where I'm standing, you have farmers. And in Washington, D.C., we have farmers. Everybody used to be something else, right? And in your very gracious introduction, Steve let you know some of the former things that I was. And I did not come to Grace today during a time of toxic polarity in our country, these huge divisions in America. I didn't come to Grace to talk about politics. And I want to take a step back, if I may, just to begin, to tell you a little bit about me. And everything I say today, I dedicate to my great Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He is the center of history, and he is the center of our life. And if it's not about the gospel, it's not about anything. So I was born and raised in Fort Wayne, Indiana, not very far from here, in 1964. I'm 56 years old, the last year of the baby boom. And I was born and raised in a very happy home. And I really say this with humility because Focus on the Family, as you all know, is about marriage, family, and parenting. And we have learned after 45 years at Focus on the Family that there is a lot going on in families. And much of it is very troubling. I gave a speech 3 years ago at a very large evangelical university. And I was speaking about a different topic that day, and I finished, and this young woman raised her hand. She said, "Mr. Goeglien, we all agree with everything that you have said. But most of us have grown up in a home where our mothers did not like our fathers, and our fathers didn't like our mothers. Mr. Goeglien, much of our life and our generation has known," she said, "a lot of chaos." Right. So while the political class fights over immigration reform and taxes and all of those things that are actually very important, it seems to me that inside the Beltway we miss the whole thing if we have forgotten that family is the pillar of civilization by God's grace. And it was a wonderful way to grow up in Fort Wayne. I loved growing up there. I had and have a very large extended family. And here's my first confession of the day. I was a nerd. I was the one always picked last on the outside kickball team. "Oh, yes, yeah, that's right, you want to play, come join us," that kind of thing. Loved sports currently. I'm just the most uncoordinated person you can imagine, right? And wasn't for lack of trying, but it was a wonderful way to grow up. My grandparents lived nearby, my aunts and uncles. One of my grandfathers emigrated from Macedonia, was only educated to the 4th grade. When my grandfather came through Ellis Island in New York, he was both illiterate and innumerate. And he lived a very long life. I was very close to my granddad. If he said it once, he said it a million times. What a blessing, what a remarkable thing to be an American. And from the youngest of ages, I loved to read. Books and I met at a very young age, and we got along very well. And I had a maternal grandmother, God rest her soul, who said to me, "Tim, if you ever ask me for a book, I will buy it for you. But here's the quid pro quo." Yes, my grandmother used Latin. "If I buy the book, you have to read it." It sounded like a pretty good deal to me, except I learned that after every book I read, my grandmother had 1,000 questions. And I built my library 10,000 volumes later. Poetry, biography, history, plays. It's wonderful. And one day, I began reading the World War II journalism of Ernie Pyle. He was one of the greatest war correspondents in American history. He died with the troops in the South Pacific. What a remarkable writer. I remember my grandmother taking me to Little Dana, Indiana, less than 1,000 people, going to Ernie Pyle's home. I remember looking at that typewriter and thinking, what magic, what lyrical, melodious prose he was able to turn out and to share with all of America what was happening in World War II. And I decided to go to Indiana University in Bloomington because that's where the Ernie Pyle School of Journalism was. And I loved it from the beginning. Words and I, prose and I, great journalism, great books, this overlay of politics, the press, public policy, it was like catnip to me at a young age. And when I was a junior at Indiana University, and by the way, I know who I'm speaking with this morning. In the Christian life, it's not when you most expect it, it's when you least expect it that providence touches your life. And I received a telephone call from a woman who was the best friend of the wife of the new young U.S. Senator from Indiana. Her name was Marilyn Quayle. Her husband was Dan Quayle. And her best friend's wife called me and she said, I saw you interviewed on a television program. Would you like to intern in the United States Senate this summer for Senator Dan Quayle? And I said something like, I think you're calling the wrong person. You know, there's no one in my family who's connected to, no. I'm calling the right person. Would you like to apply for this internship? And of course I said, I'll give it a shot. And I remember going through the interview process, and I remember receiving the letter that I had received the internship. And in the summer of 1985, I went to Washington, D.C., lived near the State Department, and interned with all the other nerds who wanted to run the country. By the way, I was from the Midwest, and I met the most remarkable array of young people. And that is when I began to learn the kaleidoscopic greatness of America. I had never heard of the Mississippi Delta. What did I know about the rolling wheat fields of Kansas? I got up every day, but what was the New Hampshire primary? What did it mean to live in New England or in California? I mean, it was really very foreign to me. And yet I met all these interns who were working for other U.S. senators. What a remarkable summer. By the way, in all of my nerdism, I had developed a passion for tennis. And I learned that tennis is incredibly social and it's efficient. You can play 3 sets in 1 hour and meet all kinds of people. I love people. That's my vocation. My only regret, Steve, is that I'm not here for a week because I'd like to meet everybody in this room. I love your stories. It's like a tapestry. What an incredible summer I had. Politics by day, tennis by night. Books when I could fit them in. And living in WA culture. The very next summer, I applied for another internship in the House of Representatives. This time for an even more obscure Dan called Dan Coates. He had taken Dan Quayle's place in the House of Representatives. What a remarkable summer I had that year. My great mentor at Indiana University had been one of the great broadcast news producers in American history, Dick Yoakum. He said, Tim, if you get that internship in the House of Representatives, I will help arrange an internship for you at NBC News in Washington on the weekends. I said, Professor Yoakum, that means that I'll be working on Capitol Hill Monday through Friday and then working again Saturday and Sunday at NBC. He said, that's right, work is good. So by week, I would take the subway to the Hill, and on the weekends, the bus up Nebraska Avenue to the great NBC News. One of my favorite things was to be in the green room at NBC. That's where all the VIPs come. I love to discuss politics, public policy, the press, art, music, all the things that make life worth living. and have a cup of coffee with a senator or a congressman or some other pundit. It was a great summer. And I thought to myself, as much as I love all this, I don't want to live in Washington, D.C. I want to go back to my home state. And I was offered a job as a television news producer at the oldest NBC affiliate in Indiana. Became a television producer, writing, producing, and editing the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 10 o'clock news. Loved it, loved every moment of it. And Providence, while I was sitting in the newsroom, arranged another telephone call. This one from the press secretary of Dan Coates. He said, you know, Tim, Dan Quayle has become the Vice President of the United States. And we have an indication that Dan Coates is going to be appointed to fulfill Dan Quayle's seat in the Senate. If that happens, will you come to Washington and be his deputy press secretary, because we need somebody who knows something about television. And this appointed senator was going to run 2 elections in 4 years, unlike most senators who run 1 election every 6 years. I said yes, moved to Washington, vowing to stay no more than 3 years to help get Dan Coates elected, and I ended up staying 10 years. As I said at our dinner party last night, in dog years, that's about 1,000 years in the Senate. The average tenure in the U.S. Senate is 18 months, because every day is about 14-hour days, right? So I was off and running. A decade later, married, 2 sons, Timothy and Paul, the loves of my life. What a wonderful life we had. When Dan Coates announced that he was retiring, I boldly said, I'm retiring too. And I accepted a job at a major foundation in Washington. And Dan Coates said to me, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. You have worked this long at this end of Pennsylvania Avenue. You ought to work in 1 presidential election. And I took his advice, because next to my own father, who's my best friend, Dan Coates is the man who I love and respect most in this world. Providence called again. A little-known consultant said, I want to have a cup of coffee with you. And I said, that's great. And he said to me, and I quote, Gary Bauer is going to run for the presidency. For those of you who don't know him, Gary Bauer was a well-known conservative leader in Washington who had never been elected to anything. And I said, well, that's interesting, Jeff. Gary's running for the presidency of what? He said, the presidency of the United States of America. And I thought to myself, this is a way to work for a small campaign. And I thought, you know, this is like Elizabeth Taylor's 9th husband. This will not last long, right? You know, Gary Bauer will get into the campaign and get out, probably within a couple of months. That year, 2000, ended up being the first time ever that the Republican Party allowed multiple candidate debates. And Gary Bauer, who, as I say, had never been elected to anything, Kentucky-born, top of his class from Georgetown Law School, Ronald Reagan's former political director, whip smart, got into the race, beat Dan Quayle in the Iowa straw poll, came in 4th in the Iowa caucuses, not bad for a person who's never won anything, and on to the New Hampshire primary, where his candidacy came to its close. Thank you and good night. You know, in life, when we think that a particular chapter is ending, God often determines that that's actually the beginning. And God uses in all of our lives all kinds of experiences that may not make any sense to you, but in His plan for you, and I'm saying this standing before you in Technicolor this morning, it's sometimes not till years later that you realize that God is using all of these experiences to prepare you for what He is calling you to do. And I remember after the Bauer for President campaign came to an end, my Senate tenure was over, I thought, I'm done with politics. And I came back from a walk, our telephone rang, and it was the deputy communications manager for the George W. Bush for President campaign. She said, and I quote, "We're not hiring many people from the Gary Bauer for President campaign, but we've watched how you have worked on the campaign trail. We want you, we know you're married, we know you have 2 young sons, ages 2 and 4, we know you live in Washington. We want to offer you a position to oversee all of our coalition's media operation. You leave your wife and sons in Washington and come to Austin." And after prayer, I said, we're a package deal as a family. We're moving to Austin. And may I tell you all, one of the greatest journeys and adventures of our family's life was just starting. We got to Texas, it was 115 degrees for the first 2 weeks. Yeah. The rear view mirror melted off of our Dodge Caravan. Right? Yeah, it was quite an experience. We rented our home in Alexandria, Virginia to a woman we had never met, and we moved into a 1-bedroom walk-up near the University of Texas. What had I done? Every day was a 15-hour day. It was a remarkable experience. And I want to pause to say something. Right hand extended. Jenny is the love of my life. My wife had and has sacrificed everything for me. We met when she was 15 and I was 16. We were on and are on this journey called life together. We're doing life together. But I learned in 115-degree weather, in a 1-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas, with boys who are 2 and 4 and very needy, that this is a person who was entirely sacrificing her life for me. Remarkable. And we got to Election Day, one of the most consequential election days in American history. And nobody won. May I tell you, for those of us who remember this, it took our breaths away. I mean, really, it took our breath away. Jenny and I came home at 3:30 in the morning. The babysitter had been watching the boys. Our 4, almost 5-year-old son came out of the bedroom, and he said, "Dad, I thought somebody was supposed to win." Right? Yeah, that's the idea. Go back to bed. Everything's just fine. Bush v. Gore went on for 36 long days. 2 days after the almost election, I flew away to Florida where all the action was happening. I was in 9 cities over those 32 days, 32 of the 36 days, overseeing the media effort. And in that entire time, a big night of sleep was 3 hours a night. I remember they gave us an afternoon off. It was really big of them, right? And we all went as fast as we could to go to Disney World. And I remember seeing a mother and father with 2 sons who were about our boy's age, and I kept thinking to myself, why are they having fun? Don't they understand we don't have a president, It was surreal. And after 36 days, the Supreme Court confirmed that George W. Bush had won. By the way, had won by less than 300 votes. And I thought, as you might imagine, I am done with politics. I went to JCPenney and bought my first suit. And the man who sold me that suit, by the way, salesmen have a way of sizing all of us up. He said, and I quote, are you ready for this? He said, I think you're going to be a big shot. Now, I would like to stand here in front of all of you this morning to tell you that I laughed out loud at that and went on with my day. But as sure as I am standing at Grace University this morning, that my thought at that moment was, you know what? He's right. I am going to be a big shot. May I tell you all, God can be doing the most remarkable things in your life. That's the gospel. At the same time, Satan is working on you. And I'm here to tell you this morning that for some of us, the seed of pride is planted very early in life. And I remember during that second internship that I told you all about a little while ago, I went back to JCPenney to buy a second suit. Same salesman. And you know what he said to me? The big shot is back. And I'm very sorry to confess to you for a second time that he was saying more than he knew, because the big shot really believed that he was back. Pride is a corrosive, toxic poison that corrodes your soul. So I was offered this remarkable job at the White House, and I mean remarkable. I remember going into my office at the White House for the first day, 25-foot ceilings, marble, mahogany, brass. Wow. I had arrived. The brass band was playing. The proverbial red carpet had been rolled out. The white dancing poodles. Didn't they realize that all they needed to do was to have the balloons go up? Prideful people are always seeking vindication for their person and for their reason for being. This is very far from the Holy Cross of Mercy. This is very far from the humility of Jesus Christ. What a remarkable 8 years I had. I was one of the longest serving assistants to George W. Bush. Oval Office meetings, helping to arrange heads of state to come to the White House, flying on Air Force One. My late great friend, William F. Buckley, Jr., taught me to sail. One of the most consequential journalists of the entire 20th century. He said to me one time, Tim, isn't it an amazing thing to be sitting or standing in the Oval Office to have the President of the United States taking notes while you're speaking? My friend, to prideful people, that is more gasoline on the fire. Now, during this time, I had a very good friend in my hometown of Fort Wayne. He was the editorial page editor of our then afternoon newspaper. He said, Tim, you're a good writer. I'm going to pause for a minute. Prideful people don't want to be good. We want to be superb, excellent, terrific, outstanding, the next F. Scott Fitzgerald. We want to be compared to William Shakespeare. Good. Tim, we'd like you to write a guest column. Write as often as you'd like. Write on any topic except for politics. You love ballet, opera, jazz, the American songbook, sports. Write about it all, not politics. And I did. Wrote those columns over and over. it was a remarkable thing to receive nice letters from people I had never met saying, "What a good column." After nearly 8 years at the White House, writing columns, my boys are growing up, extraordinary experiences every single day. What a remarkable thing to work at the White House. And in year 8 of my tenure, just on a morning like this, sunny, beautiful, terrific, I had breakfast with a friend of mine at the Hay Adams Hotel across Lafayette Square from the White House. And I came back for a morning meeting at the White House, popped open my email, and a reporter in my hometown said the following: "Did you plagiarize that column in the paper 2 days ago?" Now, I'd like to be able to come to grace and to tell you that every single day of my life, that I had begun the day in gratitude and praise, not for any particular thing that Christ had ever done for me, beyond doing everything for me, coming into history as both God and man, having an earthly ministry of about 3 years to fulfill all the ancient prophecies, willingly going to the cross to die for me, this extraordinary resurrection of Easter Sunday. Is that not enough? That's enough. That's enough for every single day of our earthly life until Resurrection Day. I'd like to be able to tell you that I really understood the nature of prayer, because prayer changes things. Here's my fourth confession of our time together. When I received that email, I prayed the most heartfelt prayer I have ever prayed. It's a very easy prayer. I did not fall down. I collapsed next to my desk, and this is the prayer I prayed. Are you ready? It's very simple. Oh God, oh God. Because what the reporter was asking was true. And by the way, it wasn't just that column, it was many other columns. You see, prideful people, and I speak as a first-hand prideful recovery patient, as if I had a heart attack, only worse. Prideful people are in their person deceitful. And prideful people have a big thing in common. We all end up hurting the people who love us and sacrifice the most for us. And Satan, when this happens, is dancing on the rooftops. So I picked myself up off the floor. And word was getting out, and I went to a meeting with my White House colleagues. Now remember, I was George W. Bush's point man for all my fellow conservatives, the faith community, and of course this couldn't be true. What were they talking about? Tim Goeglien? He was not a plagiarist. This is a great guy. I'm sorry to tell you all, I thought Tim Goeglien was a great guy. No. I was a poor, miserable sinner. Never more in need of God's grace than at that moment. I went to this meeting, Steve. We're sitting around a mahogany table. Everybody has his legal pad out because they're going to depose me and find out this crazy story. Then they're all going to go out and defend me, right? See, prideful people are always enlisting other people to help them continue to do what they're doing. Right? These are called the minions. And I was listening to my colleagues who loved me and cared about me. And I was essentially participating in a way to help them continue the deceit. And I said the following: "Thank you all very much. I'm leaving the meeting." I walked to my desk and I wrote the most difficult thing I've ever written. And I'm here to tell you this morning it wasn't plagiarized. I wrote a letter to George W. Bush telling him that he had given my wife and me and family the greatest honor of a lifetime, that I had let him down, that I was guilty as charged, that I was categorically and personally responsible for everything that had happened, and I resigned. I don't know if it's a word, by the way, but I slunk out of the White House that Friday. I could not even look into the eyes the guards at the gatehouse who had greeted me every morning and evening for nearly 8 years. Drove home. Now, I hope this is a confirmation of our friendship. But I'm going to share with you the most difficult thing that's ever happened to me, as if this were not the most difficult thing that has ever happened to me. Because I walked into my home in Alexandria. My wife, Jenny, was there. And she looked me in the eyes, and she said, and I quote, "I thought I knew you." Now, in that moment, if someone had said to me, "You have a choice. You can have your wife say that to you, or you can have a dagger plunged into your heart," I would have chosen the latter. All the sacrifice, all the love, all the encouragement. What had I done? Monday morning, I came into the White House, and I began taking the pictures off the wall and cleaning out my desk. Here is our God at work. I was at the nadir of my life, a crisis. In the political class, when you embarrass the president, you are persona non grata. Tim who? That should have been my fate. I received a call from the president's chief of staff. He said, and I quote, "The boss wants to see you." Now, at the White House, if it's good news, it's the president would like to have you come on over to the Oval Office. If it's bad news, it's the boss. And I thought, here comes my much-deserved woodshed moment. I hope no one here was ever, or knows anybody who was ever paddled, right? We used to say by the principal, this was going to be bad. I got to the Oval Office, and there was no one in the outer office. I thought, I've come on the wrong day or time. And I heard George W. Bush say, "Tim, is that you? Please come in." And I thought, I'm going to need to go to an oxygen tent because it's just the boss and me. This is going to be really bad. And then he said those words you never want to hear. "Please shut the door." Oh, dear. Yeah, you all know where I'm going, don't you? He was not sitting behind the resolute desk. He was standing in the middle of the Oval Office. This is going to be bad. And I walked up to him. I hadn't slept in 3 days. And I looked at the president directly in the eyes. I said, "Mr. President, I owe you." And he said, "You're forgiven." And I was quite certain I had not heard him properly. Now, I paused because I'm standing in the Oval Office with the leader of the free world who has no extra time for a sinning plagiarizer. And I'm looking at my boss in the eyes. And I thought, what am I going to do? And so I started again. I said, Mr. President, Tim, grace and mercy are real. He said, Tim, I have known grace and mercy in my own life, and I'm extending them to you. Again, I thought I had not heard him properly. I said, Mr. President, I take full and complete responsibility for what I did. No one is to blame except for me. I said, you gave to Jenny and me, our boys, the greatest professional opportunity of a lifetime. And I am guilty as charged. I said, I am so sorry. He said, Tim, you're forgiven. He said, I've said grace and mercy is real. He said, now, we can talk about all this if you'd like to. Or, he said, we can talk about the last 8 years. And he looked me directly in the eyes and he said, I'll let you choose. Wow. You hear all these debates about faith and politics, all these debates about where Christianity intersects in the public. This is the most remarkable example that I can think of. This is the grace and mercy, not of the President of the United States and a staffer. This is two brothers in Christ who happen to be standing in the most influential office in the world, and grace is there because Jesus Christ is present. I thought, okay. And he said, you ready for this? He said, will you sit down? Sit down? Sit down? He said, yes. And I walked over to one of the couches. He said, don't sit on the couch. He said, sit right here. He pointed toward the chair of honor where a head of state sits or a VIP, not a sinning staffer who has embarrassed the President of the United States. He asked me to sit right beneath the famous portrait of George Washington and right across from the portrait of Abraham Lincoln. And we talked about wars and rumors of wars and all the incredible events of the previous 8 years. He asked if we could pray together, and we did. We stood, we gave each other a bro hug. And I thought, this is the last time I will ever see President Bush. I was 1 foot out the door. Oh, by the way, he said, I want you to bring Jenny and your sons here next week so that I can tell them what a wonderful husband and father you've been. I was without words. The following week, we came to the Oval Office. Gifts around. The president was as good as his word. No mention of this. And the Goegliens and the Bushes have become very good friends across all of these years. You know, the great writer George Orwell famously said, don't ever believe a memoir or an autobiography that is not laced with failure. You know, when we fail and fall, that's when we get introduced to ourselves. There is a lot to learn in failure. But it begins in confession. And after we have fully confessed the whole thing, we are absolved. I mean, this is the surest nature of grace. There's nothing we can do to earn it, by the way. I mean, that's amazing. It's amazing grace. That's what this means, right? You can't get to the bottom of this kind of love. And I know we're rapidly heading toward Good Friday and Easter. You can't get to Easter without Good Friday. And my story is a Good Friday story, but it doesn't end there with the tomb that is sealed by God's grace alone. it ends in the greatest fact of human history, that Christ is risen. I'll close by saying this. Pride, and I know as Christians we don't rate sins, but if we did, I think pride would be right at the top. It's manifestly of Satan. And I have learned, and this is the last thing I'll say, I've learned the following, and if you forget everything I've said, and you probably will, here's the thing that I pray that you will never forget. And it's 3 easy words from my favorite poet of all time, T.S. Eliot, who was, of course, a convert to Christianity. Of all the beautiful things that Eliot wrote, he wrote the following: humility is endless. That's right. The opposite of pride is humility. And I would say in closing that we serve a remarkable and gracious and merciful and loving God whose humility defined his entire ministry. And this whole idea about what Jesus Christ is calling you to, I remember being your age, you're figuring it all out. The beautiful thing is you never have to be anxious, you never have to worry, you never have to be stressed. And it's a wonderful thing to keep our eye on grace and humility, because it results in the kind of courage and intelligence, I think, that Abraham Lincoln so beautifully embodied in the history of the United States. So at the expense of lecturing or sermonizing, and I know we have a grand total of about 3 minutes, and I'm good about time, I will happily answer or duck a few questions. Thank you all very much. This does not strike me as a shy bunch, so if you have a question, I'd love to hear from you on any topic, and I'll make it quick. We might turn up the house lights. Yes, right here. That's another fabulous question, and I'll give you the answer. How did all of this result in my coming to focus on the family? During my time in the White House, I came to work with this remarkable ministry. I was there, if Focus had a question, they would very often call me. And I got to know several people at Focus on the Family, and I came to see that Focus on the Family is one of the greatest ministries in the history of America. And I really do mean that. If I were a billionaire, I would do what I do for free. That's how much I love it. And that's how deeply I believe in Focus on the Family. And after I left the White House and went through what I would call the wilderness year, right, of prayer, meditation, working through all of this, I was offered a position at Focus on the Family to be their vice president, overseeing everything that we do in Washington. And I promise you, it is a daily labor of love, right? A great blessing, right? Another question? I know it's a dangerous place between a chapel speaker and your next class, right? All right, okay, good. Great. God bless you all. God bless Grace University.